terms of where I went to school, what jobs I took versus others, and then also some of the things that I learned, at least within my path. So maybe some of that might be insightful to you, maybe not, but just kind of the lessons learned and some of the things that would have saved me some time, I think, if I would have known ahead of time. So as you'll see, a lot of it's pretty basic, but I'll give anecdotes based on what a sequence of events, and then hopefully that adds some little bit more interest than just the boilerplate, slogans or something like that. So that's that. Education, career timeline, I'll give kind of an introduction there and some of the decision points and considerations of how I arrived at this place. So just to give I guess I'll get to that. Second one, awards and distinctions, I kind of want to minimize that, but I just want to say that the whole point behind why I included that is to just show that those things matter, kind of to open the door to enable you to do things, but it's not the end goal. So I want to minimize it and just show that, okay, on paper you have to look a certain way, but then really at the end of the day it's all about what can you get out of it, what's interesting to you, how do you get to where you want to be in, whatever, 10 years, 20 years, that kind of thing. So, and what's your where do you see the long term? Do you want to live somewhere? Do you want to do some type of job? Do you want to do some type of startup or anything like that? So, and then the last one is kind of where I spend the most time. Point number 3 is just lessons that I learned and some advice and considerations at least. So as Gail said, I grew up in Hilo, born in Hilo. I went to Waikia High School, graduated in 2000, so I'm probably older than I look. All right, I'm older than I probably look, that's better. So yeah, 2000 grad, high school, and then as she also said, I did a lot of extracurricular things, so surfing, diving, soccer, and things like that. But as I'll get to a little bit later, all of that was pretty much a second to my deep-seated drive to try to get somewhere and learn things academically. So we'll return to that. Then 4 years I went to Colorado State University, so that was, I think, a big decision to go there as opposed to some other schools that maybe are aspirational, right? So when people think about, okay, where do you think gets the most prestige? There's the Ivies, there's Stanford, and things like that. So to me, that was, I think, a key starting point, because I think if I went elsewhere, it probably would have led to a different outcome, just because of the competitive nature of the university. So I think UH-Hilo, Manoa, some of these other schools, I think are somewhat in line with that, where you have a collaborative environment where you're not trying to beat your peers, but you're actually working together to try to all do well in many cases. So I thought that was really important for me. The next couple years, so I guess it's like 6 years, I spent at UC San Diego, and I broke it up there, master's and PhD, because actually the first bit, this is a source of some stress for me, was my research advisor took a job in Germany right before I qualified for my graduate exams. So either I go with him and get a German degree, or I restart, right? So that's a real tough one a year and a half in. And so I decided to restart, and then so that's what the second, 2006 to 2009. And what was very interesting about that is I think it was a really good thing in disguise, because the first experience, that advisor was a micromanager. So I don't know if you folks deal with that at all in your jobs, or if you're doing research or anything like that. It's not really conducive to independent thought, because they really tell you, okay, I want this done, and you execute it, and then you go back to them and ask them what they want done. Right? So the second advisor was pretty much at the end of his career, so he said, you come up with the plan, you do your work, tell me, come up with a mature concept, and then I'll evaluate it, give you the tools you need, and you can execute it. And I think that really brought full learning, because it was just a lot more stress up front, because I didn't know what research ideas I had. And so it's basically an open slate. And so the pain was felt up front, but then long term, I think it taught me how to learn think as myself. Then 2010 to 2011, I went to Sandia National Laboratories. So most of you probably don't know, or maybe one or two of you may know what the National Laboratory System does, but it's basically a private corporation run for the government. And so it's a research-based entity, research and engineering. And so the main goal is it's pretty broad, so we do things like cybersecurity, biological defense, chemical defense, also nuclear nonproliferation, nuclear weapons safety systems, things like that. So we're not doing the active offensive part of it, it's more of how do you make them safer. Right? And so it's basically anything national security related. So I started there, and then I basically there are 2 promotions in between there until the present. So I'll go through kind of return a little bit to this, but basically of how I decided to do all of these, because there were some other options, right, that actually didn't suit me as well. Okay, this is the one slide on these awards and distinctions, and so I went pretty far back, so that's why the list could fill a page. But back in 2000 up till present, so that's just some of the things that, like I said, opened some doors. So on paper, for example, the R&D 100 award in 2014, that allowed me to get more visibility when I wrote proposals. So some of the funding agencies, okay, they recognized I had a track record. And so that enabled me to get new funding, for example. At least gave me a leg up. So in and itself is pretty inconsequential, right? It's not really that important, but I think as an enabler, I think some of these things try to structure and distinguish yourself as much as possible just to get that ability as you go forward. Okay, so kind of breeze through that, the lessons learned. So these are all very short, and I'll just fill it in with my examples. So hopefully that might be of some use to you. The first one had to do with mentorship. So throughout all stages of my academics, I was engaged in undergraduate and graduate research. And so throughout that, the mentorship was either executed throughout the professor themselves or through their postdoc or a graduate student. But really, what I learned from that is you can identify pretty quickly if they're going to be invested in you. So if they have a desire to teach or share and make you succeed. And so once I kind of identified those people, then I took advantage of it because they had a lot to offer, is what I thought. And I think it worked out very well because then as my career progressed, actually ended up crossing paths back with them. And so they made connections and this whole idea of like networking, building a network, and I think that came back very positively. So that was the first sort of piece of advice. The second one about being discouraged, I think the main example was what I already mentioned with having to switch mid-cycle throughout my PhD program. And also related to that had to do with applying for sort of there's fellowships. So I don't know how many of you are interested in doing graduate research. I don't know if you want to raise your hand or anything. Anybody interested in doing graduate school? Are you burned out from current studies? But in any case, I applied for several of these fellowships, and in first cut, I didn't actually receive them. So I think there was a chance there that you can get discouraged and just say, okay, well, I'm done with that. I'm going to just focus on my studies. But it actually turned out later that on the second pass, I actually was able to get 2 of the fellowships that I was previously turned down for. So I think that came full circle, just to have resilience, either through coursework, career, or through any other means. The third and fourth points that I think I've sort of been learning this, and it was somewhat by accident, has been finding a way to differentiate yourself from your peers. And that can be a variety of things. Pick something, right? You could be the most gifted, you could be the smartest, you could be the hardest worker, you could be the funniest, I'm not sure. You pick something, right? And really the point there is, it relates to number 4, is that if you can differentiate yourself and add value to your career, your research, your family life, I think in any context, the goal is that, and I'm kind of focusing most in career, is you don't want to be, you want to be the person that people think of if they have a problem, right? They say, okay, I need to get this done. This is the person to go to. And so I think by doing that, it adds your value and sort of your, it raises your stock within that environment. And so that's something that I've learned. An example being, as a grad student, for example, I could run several of these analytical instruments that very few other people know how to use. So by doing that, I had professors asking me, okay, can you run this on behalf of my student because we need this measurement? And so I think by doing that, it later turned out some of them were on my committee, right, my graduation committee. So they already knew, okay, he's demonstrated himself to find something that he became proficient at that no one else really took the initiative to do. So I think that carried a long way and made it a lot smoother at the end of that cycle. Another example has to do with, in my current job, I think big thing that I have been encountering is a lot of people like to do one thing, right? So they say, well, I'm the numbers guy, or I like to do computer programming, or I like to do chemistry, or I like to do physics, right? And I think if you take a step back, the way that you could differentiate yourself is saying, well, I like to solve problems, right? If you look at it and say, I want to help, I want to solve problems, and this is what I know. And I think being upfront about that has come a long way for me as well in getting new projects started, in collaborating with different interdisciplinary groups. So my background is in chemistry, as you might maybe have surmised. But I work with physicists, I work with electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, and so at the end of the day, I almost don't have an identity anymore as a chemist. It's sort of, okay, this is his track record, this is what I know Patrick to work on, so if there's anything that comes up that might be within that sphere, there's maybe a chance that we can solve some problem together. Okay, and on the heels of that, this idea about, okay, being the best at something or being recognizable, I think this balances out number 5, is that there's also the limitation side, right? So it's, I know what I'm not, and I know what I'm weak at, if you will. And so in doing so, I've been very careful to find either colleagues or others to help assist in my weaknesses, right? So for example, my project management skills are, I would say, modest at best. So I'm not the most organized in terms of managing big portfolios of money and tracking the budgets and things like that. So I've learned to go elsewhere to find people who have expertise in that, so that the project management doesn't hold up the actual execution of the work. And so I know that that's something that I need to work on. Number 6, I think, affects I'm sure you all agree, it's pretty straightforward, but I wasn't really prepared at how much this was reflected in every step of my career, particularly in the last 9 years at Sandia. And one way that that's actually true is having to do with even how our performance reviews are run. So at least as a corporation, it's been identified that more than 1/3 of how we're ranked as an employee and how we add value to the company is based on our sort of soft skills or how we interact with others. And I think that's been very successful for me to make connections and collaborations, is making sure that I can at least communicate with all kinds of people and I think just be sort of likable in a way. So finding ways to have diverse people getting together, and I think Hawaii was a good place for that, just because it's naturally so diverse. And so finding some common ground and then bringing the relationship together, whether it's for something you're actively working on or just to kind of make some connections at work or with a conference or something like that. And then it's actually come back to help me in many cases. A couple examples being my former research advisor as an undergraduate. we basically maintained contact, so we're very close. And then now it turns out he's the president of the American Chemical Society, so that he oversees the whole national and somewhat international operations associated with that. And so having sort of his, being able to call him and say, okay, look, I'm submitting this paper to this journal and it's hung up in review. Is there anything you can help with? Right? Those types of interactions can help out a lot. And so, and there's also a colleague who was also, she was a grad student when I was an undergrad in the same laboratory. And it turned out that we got along really well. We worked on projects together. And it turned out 10 years later, we actually crossed paths again, and now we're working on a collaboration together. And so it just, you never know where it'll pop up again, right? So I think finding ways to have some kind of positive reputation or leave a good impression on others was very useful. This embracing new challenges, I touched on it already, but it also has to do with this idea of not being pigeonholed, saying I'm this, I do this, right? I'm going to turn the crank in the factory, right? I'm going to just push this button, and that's my job, right? So I think that's fine if you're comfortable with it, but if you have aspirations to do something different, then I think you have to just be cognizant of new opportunities as they come. So it could be something really small. Let's say you're in the factory environment, you push the button, but then you say, well, okay, maybe there's a way to improve this process, so I'm going to talk to someone to try to see if I could put my input, right? It could be something as small as that, or it could be something as big as taking on a $50 million project that you have no experience in, right? And so the latter is sort of true in my case, where I'm a part of this very large project, and it involved electrical engineering. And my background clearly was not in that. And so it took some long nights reading textbooks, just to kind of come up to speed where I knew I should have. And I think now it's been very productive because it turned out that combining that with my background in instrumentation, I think has led to sort of a unique skill set, which goes back to this adding value part. So now, for that particular effort, there's really no one that has been identified that could do that, just because of the unique combination of skill sets. So that has been really interesting too, because now I can apply some of that to my daily life, right? So if I'm working on my car or something and there's a problem with the ECU, okay, maybe I'll go back into try to understand what the CAN bus messages are, right? And diagnose and work on troubleshooting them. So it has helped in other ways, right? And I think that characterizes something that has been also very useful, is just having a natural curiosity about things. So whether that's a part of you or not, this is similar to working or embracing new challenges, is that you never know where some skill is going to overlap with what you're pursuing or what you're working on. So that's one little point there. And then finally, this last bit about happiness being most important goes back to the timeline here, where at various stages here, so going to Colorado State, it's a state school, going to UC San Diego instead of Stanford, taking a postdoc at Sandia instead of taking a postdoc with a Nobel Prize winner. All of those choices were made sort of with my eyes wide open. So if you were looking at it objectively and said, okay, what's the best choice for getting you ahead? It probably wouldn't have been these things, right? It probably would have been, okay, let's go to Princeton. And then maybe here, let's go maybe to Stanford, and then go to UC Berkeley. But at the end of the day, I feel like these choices have made my life happier, because I enjoy extracurricular activities. I don't like the competitive nature of these top tier schools. And so this made my life bearable, and then at the end of the day, you're free to distinguish yourself how you want. So at Sandia, I have the tools I need to still accomplish and invent and write patents and write papers and contribute to national security. So I think all of that gives me back satisfaction. So I I think my encouragement would be to find something like that for yourself, where there could be expectations put on you by others, maybe family, money, friends, but that's pretty short-lived, right? So you could make $500,000 a year doing something you hate, and that's not really sustainable, right? And so, in my experience, if you can get as much of that part of it, but also your life satisfaction, then that's sustainable, and you can continue on and enjoy your work. And I think that's where I'm at, sort of by accident and sort of by design. So I think those are the main sort of talking points that I had. I can entertain any questions or elaborate on any part of it if you want. I know for like the high school students, you feel free to chime in if you want for college guidance or anything like that, or if the existing students have any questions about grad school or my understanding of the workforce, feel free. So
I think you provided similar information to the high
Yes, I did,
schoolers
yeah.
and was really, really valuable. And when we got to the end of your hour, you said, "Oh, I think I should tell you what I do, and I think you should tell us what you do."
Okay, all right, that's good. Thank you for the primer. Yes, I paid her earlier to kind of feed me the questions. Yeah, so what I actually do, it's pretty broad spanning, but I'm a chemist / material scientist / I do some engineering. So historically, the last 8 years, I've been working on radiation detection materials. So what that entails is designing basically a physical block of something, right? So these are what I specifically work on are organic materials. So it would be something like a polymer, organic crystal, or organic glass, something like that. But these are all transparent materials, and the idea there is you want it to be responsive to ionizing radiation. So that's what we're holding up, basically, these kind of optical-looking elements. And the idea is that if you have ionizing radiation impinging on it, it then will cause production of light. And the type of light that is generated, whether it's the color or how fast the light is emitted, allows you to get a signal as to what type of radiation it is. And that's really the bottom line. So I mentioned Sandia does national security, so we're doing for radiation security. So non-proliferation. So if, let's say, a terrorist or some terrorist country wants to smuggle in or smuggle out fissionable materials, so that would be plutonium or highly enriched uranium, then we would be able to